Hi, Othon. I'm so glad we're here in Athens at the end of our book, the whole production, writing, and it's about ready to be published on September 1st. And I was really fascinated with your chapter on education. I know that you had written your doctoral dissertation on a comparison between Metaxas and the kernels. So tell me a little bit more about the chapter. What are some of the main points that you think that the reader should really pay attention to?
For me, education is a very representative field of how dictatorships behave, because the field of education is one of the first, maybe the prime victim of a dictatorship. They simply want to suppress any kind of opposition. And opposition comes from education naturally. I mean, it's this free thinking that dictatorships really cannot stand, and they want to suppress that. So while I was working in my PhD thesis years ago, and I was so lucky to be able to kind of retrieve all this information that I had dealt with, it was, again, I could see myself while doing, that research when I was much closer into the dictatorship, and it was a very recent past. And then revisiting now as well, after so many years, it kind of makes me think how typical that dictatorship is and how timeless this phenomenon is. All other dictatorships, still now, they're similarly treating education. So what I want to say about that particular period is that there is this type of rupture, like a very radical rupture with the past. In the 1960s, there was that kind of momentum of liberalism in education before the dictatorship, and how the regime, one of the first acts that it did was to revert any kind of progress that had been achieved before. So that was something that was consistent throughout in terms of reactionary policy and at the same time suppression of any kind of opposition, but also the need for the military junta to deal with education also as a vehicle for modernization, which was very much needed at that time. So on the one hand, they were suppressing the sector, but on the other hand, they needed also this sector to modernize in order to be able to adjust to a very rapidly growing Greek economy. That kind of contradiction, I think, is very interesting. In the end, obviously, they failed. You know how I use this title in my chapter, The Patient in Caste, that Papadopoulos, the dictator, liked to refer to when he was talking about his regime and how it came in order to save the patient, the country. But in the end, what I'm saying in this chapter is that the patient in the caste was very much education, because actually the military junta did put the education in a caste, in a kind of a state of patient for 7 years. And then there's also the legacy of education, which I believe is very important, and we're seeing up until now. And I don't need to explain too much about that, because the Polytechnic uprising and how we celebrate the Polytechnic every year is this kind of reminder of how the regime dealt with education. I mean, that is up until now. It's very, very difficult to escape that kind of legacy.
Isn't it kind of ironic that the students, the youth, is what they wanted to put in the caste, and it's the very youth that's going to break the caste through their protests in both the law school and in the Polytechnic?
Which is always the hope. I mean, I'm thinking of other cases as well, of dictatorships. Even, nowadays, it is in the end, that very lively part of society that is going to react to this kind of suppression. And in the best of circumstances, in the most hopeful of circumstances, you can have change. They can start this kind of change. Because no matter how much dictators try to suppress education and the youth, in the end, it's impossible to suppress it.
Wonderful. Well, I'm so glad you contributed your chapter, and I hope our readers are going to enjoy it just as much, if not more. Thank you.